Because of the general emergency, Laurel had been forced to watch cable news stations with commercial breaks. She generally avoided being advertised to. She couldn't even bear pledge breaks on PBS. It had been a long time since she had seen a television commercial, and she was surprised by what was being advertised. Apparently, many people were incontinent, but embarrassed about it, so there was a way for them to have their supplies discreetly delivered. You wouldn't want to run into a friend in the line at Costco with Depends in your cart. Then there was an ad for a device that would allow people to turn off their lights with their smartphones, obviously pandering to everyone's desire to have one's entire life take place inside one's smartphone. Their new pod, their geodesic dome on Mars. Then there came an ad for an impotence drug. Laurel wondered how many men actually were impotent, and if that was why they were so angry, especially the old white ones. People who had had hip or knee replacements with faulty devices were told how they could cash in. Apparently, there were a lot of people with rheumatoid arthritis that could buy another drug. A lot of people had problems with constipation, a special kind of constipation caused by opioid addiction. But luckily, there was a pill they could get just for that. The news about fake news dominating her news feed from the New York Times, which she had taken to reading compulsively since the election, was making Laurel rethink her stance on objective reality. There was such a thing after all, and the other side was flooding the world with propaganda that many Americans were swallowing hook, line, and sinker. She had just opened an email from the New York Times with a header that the articles were chosen specially for her. This was odd because the New York Times didn't usually act like this, but she scrolled through the articles they offered to see who they thought she was. First was an article about how to make lemon tarts. That was odd because she had absolutely no interest in making pastries. Then there was an article about Putin and how great he was for America. Laurel quickly scrolled to the bottom of the article and saw it had been posted by Breitbart News, the white nationalist platform of the president-elect's chief advisor. It was a fake NYT site. She quickly closed it and opened the real NYT site, NewYorkTimes.com, and began reading articles about all the anti-environment and oil interests who would be dominating the new administration. She read faster and faster, scrolling past the advertisements for Chevron that were interrupting each story. Reframing the picture. Reframing the picture was one method Laurel employed to deal with her anxiety, but this method had stopped working for her. For each way she tried to reframe it, the picture looked worse. In one version, the country was very quickly devolved into a police state run by generals who oversaw the herding of non-white and non-Christian citizens into private prisons and death camps. And tanks rolled through the inner city, laying waste. Billionaires, meanwhile, would be building their colony on Mars as the Earth melted and was left to roaming bands of cannibals. Actually, that was all she could come up with. Bring down the patriarchy, Laurel thought quietly to herself. She wanted all old white men to die. She was glad there had been several weeks of rain on Saturday morning, so she hadn't had to walk with Boris, and she wasn't sure she would ever walk with him again. She knew it was good to try to listen and show respect to the enemy, because they were just acting out because of being made to feel disrespected and overlooked. So listening to them and trying to understand where they were coming from was a good way to disarm them. And moreover, she wanted to understand what the enemy was thinking so she could fight back. But she didn't think she was going to show any respect for Boris if they walked together. She scrolled through the guide on her TV to find Fox News, thinking she should find out how they were spinning things. When she tuned in, they were on commercial break, in the middle of an ad showing an obese, blonde, white woman eating a steak, followed by an ad for a resort. So far, no pill pushing, but then the news came on with an item about how Christmas was being stolen by people complaining about overly religious Christmas carols. And then a feel-good story about how a white deputy saved a black baby's life with CPR and then said to the reporters, "They are so resilient. Look at this little thing." Laurel flipped back to MSNBC. There was a commercial for a painkiller in progress. It was hard. It was hard to believe what was unfolding before her face, what had been unfolding ever since the election. An ad came on between news reports for a patch full of the stuff dentists give you to numb you so that you could wear on your back every minute of the day to make sure you would not feel anything, especially any pain. And then there was an ad for autoimmune skin conditions, and then one for sports socks with anti-odor protection. There used to be something that Laurel did with her life before having all of this constantly in her face. Then there was a human interest story about a deer appearing in a city park, surely a victim of climate change, followed by ads for AT&T and credit card debt, which could magically disappear into a small stranglehold for life. Guarantees, no risk. And for people who are worrying they are losing their memories, there was a pill at last. When Laurel returned to the program, a massive ice sheet was about to break off, destabilizing the whole Antarctic ice sheet. Laurel's friend Isabella had an abscess in her jaw, and Laurel's own water heater was leaking. The plumber arrived. The water heater had a 10-year warranty. It was exactly 10 years old. Laurel's 98-year-old mother's caregiver took her to the emergency room to make sure she didn't have pneumonia. Old people who got pneumonia frequently died. Laurel's mother could actually die. But she didn't have pneumonia, and she didn't die. Final score, entropy 3, Laurel's mother 1. Okay, she was becoming an agoraphobic. Watching TV, reading the New York Times, Washington Post, the New Yorker, as well as trying to read a novel for her book group during the commercial breaks. The book did not make any sense. She couldn't piece all of its pieces together and did not think it was going to be worth the effort. Who cared about any of these words? And yet, now that the program was back on, she felt a suffocating rage. The whole situation had wreaked havoc with Laurel's whole sense of self, her private thought structure inside her head. There was nothing inside anymore. There was only outside. She had become an empty shell, invaded by an alien force. Like in any disaster, there was a silver lining. She stopped judging herself. You can't judge something that isn't there. Finally out for a walk, Laurel marveled at the reality of the breeze, of the squares of the sidewalk, extending endlessly and still retreating.